Let's talk to Major General Chip Chapman about this. He's a former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Very good morning to you, Chip.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Now, when he talks about, siding with the US against the EU, there's a possibility of these trade tariffs. Obviously, the EU and America are largely on the same side on, whether it's issues like Middle East or Ukraine, cybersecurity. We'll come to that as well in a moment. But do you think that we should choose a side, or is Keir Starmer being quite right that actually we should never choose a side?
Well, I don't think we should choose a side. I mean, it's not a binary either or, I don't think. All those are sort of allies, both diplomatically, militarily, economically. And so it isn't that binary choice. We have to trade with both. The conditions for those may be slightly different, but it's slightly bizarre to think that there is a binary choice. That is not to say, as hearing your last things, that the special relationship hasn't been overplayed. Some people would call that the Whitehall disease at the heart of government, in that we think that we have more leverage over the Americans than we actually have. The Americans have always valued us militarily. We've always been the second largest contributor in any of the sort of forays abroad, both in Afghanistan, Gulf War I, Gulf War II. So they value the military contribution. They value the P5 membership contribution in the UN Security Council, but we can't overplay it.
Yeah, that's it. We need to, I say, know our place in these days when we are a much smaller military and economic power. There was talk in the speech also about boosting ties with the US to counter the erratic behaviour of Vladimir Putin. And there really has been a real sort of awakening in recent years, since particularly the invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin, that Europe is really not able to defend itself. It hasn't got the military might. We saw, Germany really is not having their act together, being so reliant on Russia and not actually, not contributing enough towards their defence budgets, not even most countries in line with the requirements, the legal requirements under the NATO agreement. Do you think that actually, we still very much need the US to protect us from tyrants like Vladimir Putin?
Well, it would be in our interest if they're there for the future. And in a sense, there was some Trump-proofing of that in the Senate with the passage last December of the National Defense Authorization Act, which said, for example, that you would need Trump, if he was to go really rogue, would need a 75% majority or 75% of the Senate to vote against that. Now, even if that didn't happen, of course, he could stymie, if he wanted, these sort of processes of planning and things like that in NATO. Now, Europe hasn't contributed enough. It's slightly underplayed in terms of what they have in supporting Ukraine. I think militarily, the Americans have provided $61 billion. The EU about 46, but there are other two parts of support which are economic and humanitarian, and the figures actually level out if you gross them up. Right. But the Americans only have certain capabilities which we don't have. Yeah, their cyber domain is far greater than most, although GCHQ is a cyber superpower. They have the high-end level air defense systems, particularly on Patriot. And so you do need American support. And again, this shouldn't be a binary choice of either or. And I think that's what you're going to see with the complexities of if we do get to negotiations with Russia. And I don't think that's a given. Yeah. And again, it's a wide spectrum of possibilities there when, for example, if you go back to the town hall sayings of Trump in 23, it wasn't in terms of, he didn't think in terms of winning or losing. He thought in terms of stopping the killing, which you could say is an honourable thing and humanitarian aspect, and that makes sense, but it rewards the aggressor. You've got the middle position, and Keith Kellogg, former General Keith Kellogg, has now been appointed as the special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. His thing in campaigning terms was that they were going to say to Ukraine, come to the table, we won't support you, but at the same time say to Russia, come to the table or we'll support Ukraine with everything. Yeah. Now, what is on the table is the unknown variable within that. And the third part of that argument is that in September, there was a thing called the Helsinki Commission in America, which looks at Russian-American relations, which said that when Trump understands the nature of Putin and that he's not an honest broker in terms of negotiations, he wants negotiations but not to negotiate, he just wants people to give things up to him, then Trump will realize the error of his ways. and in terms of pragmatic realism as one of the aspects of American
Yeah,
foreign.
I think also, when Putin tries to run rings around him and people say that Trump is looking weak, he won't like that. That said, there are still really big concerns that there was a meeting that Donald Trump had, was it 2018, with Vladimir Putin on his own for a very long time. No officials present, still haven't been told what was said in that meeting. There is a lot of concern in security circles that Vladimir Putin does have some hold over Donald Trump. I think that is a genuine, realistic concern that we should have. I wonder what you make of the NATO Secretary-General, Mark Rutte, the new Sec-Gen. He's speaking in Brussels today, ahead of a meeting with the foreign ministers of NATO members, and he's said that he believes that Vladimir Putin is using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles. There's got to be a concern about that.
Well, you're going to use every weapon in your armoury to try and achieve your geopolitical strategic objectives. And one of the strategic objectives of Putin is to regain lost territory and spheres of influence. So he will use what is in his armoury, less possibly at the moment the spectre of nuclear weapons. But there are conditions in which he would even do that, because if he wants to succeed as a country and he thinks that his regime is under threat or that the combat potential of Russia is severely degraded, there is a chance that he could use that. Now, he's been stopped from doing that, and there was potential for that in September 22 by the sort of restraining hand of China. And all the P5 members there, again, have
That's the permanent members of the Security Council.
It is. Have stated unequivocally, as back in 2021, for example, that nuclear weapons should never be used, and you can't win a war by using them. But that doesn't mean they're still
you can. I mean, that's things you can. And that's why people have them, for goodness sake. Can I just ask you, just finally, we've had a warning from the Chief Executive of the National Cyber Security Centre. This is Richard Horne. He says Britain is complacent about cyber attacks and underestimates the threat from hackers, and is now worse at dealing with cyber attackers than previously. That is a really big concern, because we know the cyber attacks coming not just from Russia, they're coming from the Middle East, they're coming from China particularly as well. This is kind of the new way that wars are going to be fought, and very, very difficult to counter. Are we too complacent?
It's not that we're too complacent, in the sense that cyber is now deemed to be one of the 5 domains of war alongside land, sea, air and space, because you need space power with satellites in terms of terminal guidance of missiles and things like that. There's a cyber skills gap, and the key thing about cyber is the architecture of the internet was never designed to be contested. It was free and morally neutral, but there are malign actors who can come in. And the problem is not with the mouse, it's with the cheese. It's full of holes. And so there are attack vectors which you can get in. So it's the cybersecurity gap. And more importantly, because I do some work in this area, that a lot of businesses take the fact that they're going to be breached as a business cost. So the amount of investment in businesses in protecting themselves left of hack with threat monitoring and security enabling of their systems is pretty poor. So all those people who are young and haven't got a job, there's such a market for skill sets, and there's a lot of money to be made by those who want to go into the cyber security.
We'd rather in the cyber security than in the actual cyber hacking side of things, wouldn't we? Major General Chip Chapman, former head of the counter-terrorism unit at the Ministry of Defence in the UK. Thank you very much for joining us.